On a radiant summer night, the dazzling lights sparkled like stars in the sky, and I, Lena, stepped into the grand hall of the charity gala with a heart full of anticipation and anxiety. Wearing a deep crimson silk dress that hugged my slender figure, I reassured myself that tonight would be a memorable evening. The hall was filled with glittering outfits and lively laughter. I often felt like a small fish in a vast ocean amidst this crowd, but I was determined not to feel lost. Taking a deep breath, I reminded myself that this was an opportunity to expand my connections and perhaps find something exciting. As I wandered around the room, sipping cocktails, suddenly my gaze locked onto a man. He stood tall, with dark, wavy hair and eyes that sparkled like two gems. Clad in a sharp black suit, there was an air of mystery and magnetism about him. I felt a spark of electricity when our eyes met. "Excuse me, would you mind if I offered you a drink?" he asked in a deep, warm voice, a charming smile illuminating his handsome face. "Of course," I replied, my heart racing as I smiled back, flustered by his attention. We clinked glasses, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter held a special significance. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, like a gentle stream. He introduced himself as Alex, a young entrepreneur building his career. I couldn't help but feel that I was sitting with an old friend, as if we had known each other for ages. He inquired about my interior design work, and I sensed a genuine interest in his questions. After the gala, Alex wasted no time in reaching out. He texted me every day, his messages sweet and thoughtful, making my heart flutter. He sent flowers to my office, timed his texts perfectly to catch me as I finished work, and even waited outside my office building just to chat for a few minutes. Every date with Alex was filled with laughter and fascinating stories. We strolled along the riverbank, watched the sunset, and shared our dreams and hopes. The sense of peace and safety I felt in his presence made me forget all my worries. It had been so long since I had experienced such simple happiness. One evening, Alex invited me to a concert. As he held my hand and led me into the vibrant world of music, everything else around us faded away. His gaze was fixed on me, and at that moment, I knew I had found something precious in my life. But nothing could remain perfect forever. One evening, while sitting with my best friend at a cafe, I was excitedly recounting my experiences with Alex. However, instead of sharing in my joy, my friend frowned. "Are you sure about him, Lena? I've heard some things about Alex. He doesn't seem like the person you're describing," she said, concern etched on her face. I laughed, feeling a mix of annoyance and disbelief. "You're being too suspicious. Alex is wonderful. You don't see how he is when he's with me." Lai shook her head. "Maybe I'm just paranoid, but you should be cautious. There are too many people hiding dark sides that we can't imagine." Her words pierced through me like an arrow. I wanted to believe Alex was a good man, but the seed of doubt began to take root in my mind. Despite my efforts to dismiss it, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. One night, as Alex drove me home, we paused in front of my apartment building. The warm yellow light illuminated his face, and when he held my hand, there was a sincerity in his gaze that I couldn't deny. "I've waited a long time to find someone like you," Alex whispered. My heart melted, and for a moment, the doubts within me began to fade. But just as I was about to step inside, I noticed a strange figure lurking in the shadows, standing beneath the streetlight. A man with a cold gaze was watching us intently. A chill ran down my spine, but when I turned back to confirm, the figure had vanished into the night. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, his voice filled with concern. "I just thought I saw someone watching us," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. Alex frowned and gently hugged me. "Don't worry, I'll always be here to protect you." His words made me feel secure, yet deep inside, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. While the love Alex had shown me seemed genuine, I couldn't help but wonder if there was something hidden behind his enigmatic eyes. I was completely immersed in my love for Alex, but deep down, a part of me was still wary, warning me about potential dangers lurking ahead. Could I trust this love, Or would I have to confront shadows I had never imagined? The following days felt like a dream. My time with Alex became my escape, a safe haven from the demands and loneliness of everyday life. He brought a warmth that made my heart beat faster, a spark I had missed for so long. Yet, despite the passion we shared, Lee's words remained etched in my mind, like an unsettling whisper I couldn't ignore. One Saturday afternoon, as I arranged fresh flowers in my small apartment, my phone buzzed. It was Alex. "Lena, I want to show you something special tonight," he said, his voice smooth and comforting. "Are you free?" I smiled, the familiar excitement rising within me. "Of course, I'd love that. What are we doing?" "It's a surprise," he replied, with a mysterious edge in his tone that made my heart skip a beat. "Dress warmly, though." That evening, Alex picked me up, and we drove out of the city, the vibrant lights fading as we traveled into the countryside. He seemed more serious than usual, his hands gripping the wheel tightly, his gaze focused. We finally arrived at a secluded clearing where a quiet, moonlit lake lay spread before us, reflecting the night sky. The only sounds were the gentle rustling of trees and the distant calls of birds. The world around us felt frozen in time. I shivered in the cool night air, and Alex wrapped his coat around my shoulders, his hand resting gently on my arm. "I come here sometimes to think," he said softly, his eyes distant, as though he was lost in memories. "Life can be complicated, and this place helps me sort it out." I gazed at him, searching his face for answers. There was a sadness in his eyes, a depth I hadn't noticed before. "What's on your mind, Alex? You can tell me." He paused, hesitating. "There are things about my past, Lena, that I'm not proud of. I've made mistakes that sometimes haunt me." A chill ran through me, but I placed my hand over his, squeezing it. "Everyone has a past, Alex. You don't have to be perfect." He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and then nodded slowly, his gaze intense. "Thank you, Lena," he murmured and leaned down, his lips brushing mine. In that moment, everything else faded, replaced by the warmth of his embrace. But when we pulled apart, I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness, a shadow, lurking near the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. My pulse quickened, and I felt Alex's grip tighten around me. "Did you see that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Alex's jaw clenched, and he shook his head. "Just the shadows, Lena. Let's not let them ruin tonight." But the chill from that shadow lingered, even as we returned to the warmth of his car. There was something Alex wasn't telling me, and a small part of me feared what those shadows might hide. The next morning, I confided in Lai, telling her about the shadow and the strange sense of foreboding that had clung to me since the night by the lake. As usual, her skepticism cut through my words. "Lena, it sounds like this guy has a lot of secrets," she said bluntly, her eyes narrowing. "Secrets don't mix well with relationships." "But Lai," I argued. "He's been nothing but kind to me. Everyone has things in their past they aren't proud of. Don't you think he deserves a chance?" She sighed, her gaze softening. "Maybe. But be careful, okay? Sometimes the people we think we know the best are the ones who surprise us the most." Despite my best efforts to push it aside, the tension between my feelings for Alex and my growing unease simmered under the surface. I continued to see him, trying to let the warmth of his affection drown out my doubts. But every so often, I'd catch a flash of that same shadow from the lake, the way he'd go quiet, his gaze shifting, as if someone was watching. One day, Alex mentioned a business trip he'd have to take for a week to a city far from here. He was leaving tomorrow morning, and for some reason, the thought of him being gone filled me with an unfamiliar dread. "Will you be all right?" he asked, his tone light, but his gaze serious. I laughed, brushing it off. "Of course, Alex. I'll miss you, but I'll survive." He looked relieved, but as he hugged me goodbye, I could feel his hesitation. I knew he was holding back something, some truth buried beneath the charm and warmth. And as he drove off that night, a heavy silence settled around me. A few days later, a knock on my door interrupted the quiet solitude of my evening. Surprised, I opened it, only to find a stranger standing there, a tall man in a dark trench coat, his gaze sharp and calculating. "Lena," he asked, his voice steady but piercing. "Yes. Can I help you?" I replied, the unease in my stomach growing. "I'm Detective Grant. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Alex Knight." My heart sank, and suddenly, I was back at the lake, seeing the shadow, feeling the chill. I don't know what you mean. Is Alex in trouble?" Detective Grant studied me for a long moment and then nodded. "Perhaps we should talk inside." As we sat down, he pulled out a small notebook and pen, his gaze steady. "I'm here because Alex Knight is currently under investigation for a series of fraudulent investments," he said, his words slicing through the air. "Several people have lost significant amounts of money due to his business dealings." I froze, my mind racing, memories of Alex's kind gestures and loving words clashing with the implications of the detective's words. "That can't be true. He's a good person." "I'm sure that's how he presents himself," Detective Grant replied, his tone gentler. "But I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual, any patterns, or if he's asked for financial assistance." I shook my head, my hands trembling. "No, he hasn't asked me for anything. He's been nothing but supportive and generous." The detective closed his notebook and gave me a sympathetic look. "If you remember anything, please let us know. We just want to ensure no one else is hurt." After he left, I sank onto the couch, my mind spinning. Who was Alex? The man who had held me by the lake, whispering sweet promises, or the man the detective believed him to be? The warmth of our love felt tainted, and yet a part of me still clung to the memories, to the moments we shared. Was I holding on to a lie, or was there another truth waiting to be uncovered? The days following Detective Grant's visit were a blur of confusion and heartbreak. I couldn't reconcile the Alex I knew, the one who made me laugh, who looked at me like I was his whole world, with the man the detective described. Could it be true? Or was this all some twisted mistake? I tried calling Alex, desperate to hear his voice, to hear him tell me everything was okay. But every call went unanswered, each ring fueling my anxiety. When he finally replied with a brief, vague text, "Busy. Call you later," the message felt like an icy slap. Still, I held on to hope, clinging to memories of our shared laughter, his whispered words, and the warmth in his eyes. But with each passing day, the unease only grew. One evening, while sorting through a stack of photos and mementos from our dates, I found a small note buried in my purse, a scribbled address in Alex's handwriting. A rush of curiosity and dread surged through me. I hadn't remembered Alex giving it to me, yet something about it felt intentional, like he'd left it there as a clue. The address was across town, in an unfamiliar part of the city. My heart pounded as I weighed my options, but the desire for answers outweighed my fear. I grabbed my keys and headed out, determined to find some clarity, or at least a shred of reassurance. 30 minutes later, I arrived at the address, an old, worn-down office building with cracked windows and peeling paint. The street was nearly deserted, except for a few stray cats lurking in the shadows. My nerves prickled as I walked inside, the air thick with dust and the musty scent of old paper. I found the door with Alex's name on it, Alex Knight, Financial Services, and pushed it open, half expecting it to be locked. To my surprise, it swung open easily, revealing a cluttered office space. The walls were lined with boxes filled with papers, files spilling onto the floor, and a single desk covered in scattered documents. My eyes scanned the room, heart hammering as I tried to make sense of it all. This didn't look like a legitimate business office. It looked abandoned, almost like it was left in a hurry. I moved toward the desk, hands shaking as I sifted through the paperwork. Contracts, bank statements, lists of clients' names, all names I didn't recognize. And then, I found a letter with Alex's name on it, scrawled in angry handwriting. It read, "Mr. Knight, time's up. I want my money back by the end of the month, or things will get ugly. You know who I am." A chill ran down my spine. Who had written this, and what kind of mess was Alex involved in? Suddenly, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. Panic surged through me, and I quickly slipped behind a row of filing cabinets, holding my breath. The door creaked open, and I saw a figure enter, a tall man in a dark coat. He paused, surveying the room as if looking for something or someone. I stayed silent, barely daring to breathe. The man seemed to pick up a few papers, glanced around, and then left, slamming the door shut behind him. The room was silent again, but I remained frozen for several minutes, the fear holding me in place. When I finally felt safe enough to move, I slipped out of the building, my heart still racing, the questions multiplying in my mind. Later that night, I sat on my couch, staring at the pile of documents I'd brought back with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything I'd known about Alex was unraveling, revealing dark, hidden truths. Who was he really? And why had he kept so much from me? Just as I was drowning in these thoughts, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Alex. "I'm back in town. Meet me tomorrow night." A mix of relief and fear filled me. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but another part feared what he might say. I typed back a quick reply, "Yes, let's meet," and set the phone down, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. The next evening, I arrived at the restaurant Alex had chosen, a quiet, dimly lit place in a corner of the city. He was already there, sitting at a secluded table, a glass of wine in hand. The familiar sight of him, with his charming smile and steady gaze, made my heart ache. But the memory of the abandoned office, of the threatening letter, lingered, a silent reminder of the secrets between us. He rose as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. "Lena," he said softly, taking my hand. "It's so good to see you." I forced a smile, studying him carefully. "Alex, we need to talk. About us, about your work." His expression hardened just for a moment before he recovered, the warmth returning to his eyes. "Of course. Let's talk about anything you need to, Lena." Taking a deep breath, I leaned forward. "Alex, I found your office," I whispered, searching his face for any reaction. "I went there and saw the documents, the files, the threats." "What's going on? Who are you really?" A shadow crossed his face, and for a long moment, he looked away, as if struggling to find the right words. "Lena," he said finally, his voice low, "there are things in my past that I wanted to protect you from. Mistakes, decisions I wish I could change." "Alex, I need the truth," I insisted, feeling a mixture of anger and desperation. "Who are you really, and what are you hiding?" He hesitated, his gaze searching mine. Then, just as he opened his mouth to speak, his phone rang. He glanced at it, and his face went pale. Without a word, he rose, turning away to answer the call. I couldn't hear much, but his tone was tense, the warmth in his voice replaced by something colder, sharper. When he returned, his expression was guarded. "I have to go, Lena. There's something I need to handle." I reached out, grabbing his hand. "Please, Alex, just tell me what's happening. Are you in danger?" He held my gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and something else. Fear. "Lena, I never wanted you to get involved. This is my burden, not yours." With that, he pressed a kiss to my forehead, lingering for a moment before he pulled away and disappeared into the night, leaving me sitting there, alone, my heart heavy with unanswered questions. The city's lights flickered through the car window as we drove in silence, the weight of the evening pressing down on both of us. I tried to focus on the hum of the engine, anything to distract from the million questions racing through my mind. But as I looked over at Alex, his jaw set and his gaze hard on the road, I couldn't ignore the doubt gnawing at me. Finally, I broke the silence. "Are you ever going to tell me what's really going on?" He didn't look at me, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Lena, you know it's complicated." "That's not good enough, Alex. After everything tonight, I deserve to know what's happening. You owe me that much." He sighed, a deep, weary sound, and finally pulled the car to the side of a quiet street. He turned off the engine and sat back, his head resting against the seat, eyes closed as if gathering the courage to speak. "Fine," he said quietly, opening his eyes to look at me. The truth is, I owe people, dangerous people, a lot of money. I got involved in some things years ago, things that spiraled out of control. First, I thought I could handle it, but now he shook his head. It's too late to turn back. A chill ran down my spine as his words settled over me. I had always known there were parts of Alex's life he kept hidden, but I never imagined it was this dark, this dangerous. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I whispered, feeling the sting of betrayal mixed with a deep ache of worry. I didn't want you to get dragged into this, he said, reaching out to take my hand. I thought if I kept you away from that side of my life, you'd be safe. But now, he trailed off, guilt shadowing his features. I squeezed his hand, feeling the tension between us, a bond one couldn't break despite the fear clawing at my chest. Alex, if you're in trouble, then we'll figure this out together. I'm not going to leave you. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of relief and despair. I don't deserve you, Lena, but thank you. Just as he said that, a loud bang echoed from outside, cutting through the quiet night air. We both froze, the tension snapping back, as the reality of our situation hit us. A few minutes later, we ducked into an alley, our breaths fogging in the chilly air. Alex had parked the car several blocks away, leading us on foot through a maze of side streets and hidden paths. I struggled to keep up, my heart racing as we moved deeper into the shadows. Where are we going? I asked, trying to mask the fear in my voice. There's a place we can go, Alex replied, his voice low. A contact of mine, someone who can help us stay out of sight for a while. The mention of another stranger, another piece of Alex's hidden world, made me uneasy. But I pushed the feeling aside and kept moving, trusting him despite the doubts that lingered in my mind. Finally, we reached an old, rundown building at the edge of the district. The windows were dark, and the place looked abandoned. Alex knocked on the door in a specific pattern, and after a tense pause, it swung open to reveal a tall, rugged man with a cautious expression. Alex, he greeted, looking between the two of us. Didn't think I'd be seeing you here. Desperate times, Carter. Alex replied, keeping his voice low. We just need a place to lay low for the night. Carter studied me for a moment, his gaze sharp, before he stepped aside to let us in. The place was sparse, with only a few pieces of worn furniture and a stack of old newspapers on the floor. But it was warm and it was safe, at least for now. Inside, Carter disappeared into the back, leaving us alone in the dimly lit room. I looked at Alex, waiting for him to explain, to reassure me that we were safe. But he seemed distant, lost in thought. Is there anything else you're not telling me? I asked softly. He hesitated, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't quite place. Lena, there's so much I want to tell you. But every time I think I'm ready, something holds me back. I don't want to lose you. I've already lost too much. Then trust me, I whispered, taking his hand. Let me in, Alex. Let me help you. He looked down, his jaw clenched as he fought an internal battle. It's not that simple, he said finally. There's someone else involved. Someone from my past. Who? I asked, my heart sinking. Her name is Isabel, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She was part of this life before you. I thought I could leave that part of my past behind, but she's still in it, tangled up in everything I owe, everything I can't escape. The mention of another woman, someone who still held a part of Alex's world, left me breathless. The hurt cut deep, but I forced myself to stay calm. What does she want? I asked, feeling a surge of jealousy and fear. She's not here to hurt you, he replied, shaking his head. But her presence complicates things. Isabel has connections, leverage. She's dangerous in her own way. But right now, she might be our only chance. Our only chance. I swallowed, realizing how deeply entangled we both were in Alex's past. The life he had tried to shield me from was now looming over us, threatening to destroy everything we had. That night, as we lay on the cold, uncomfortable couch, Alex held me close, his arms wrapped around me like he was afraid to let go. I could feel the tension in his body, the weight of secrets he hadn't yet shared. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. For all of this. for putting you in danger." I tightened my hold on him, letting him know I was here, that I wasn't going anywhere. "I'm with you, Alex. No matter what." He kissed my forehead, his lips lingering there, a silent promise in the darkness. I closed my eyes, clinging to the love we shared, hoping it would be enough to keep us safe. But deep down, I knew that the shadows of Alex's past were closing in on us, and soon, we'd have no choice but to face them, together. The next morning, we woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. Alex sprang to his feet, his body tense, listening intently. I held my breath, my heart pounding as the footsteps drew closer. "Stay behind me," he whispered, moving toward the door. Carter appeared, his face grim. "You need to go.
Now."
"They're looking for you, Alex, and it won't be long before they find this place." Alex nodded, his expression determined. "Thank you, Carter." Without another word, he took my hand, and we slipped out of the building, blending into the early morning shadows. As we walked, Alex leaned close, his voice filled with resolve. "Lena, I need you to be strong. Whatever happens next, don't look back. Trust me, and we'll make it through." I nodded, feeling a fierce determination swell within me. I had chosen to stay with him, to face the danger by his side. And now, as the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the city, I knew that there was no turning back. Whatever waited for us in the shadows, we would face it together. The clash of metal against concrete and the shouts that echoed through the warehouse were both deafening and surreal. As I swung the piece of metal, desperately trying to fend off the attackers, it struck me just how far I had fallen into this twisted world of secrets and lies. Alex fought like a man possessed, his movements sharp and precise, but he was outnumbered. As he struggled to keep one of the men at bay, the other lunged toward me, his eyes flashing with malice. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, and swung wildly. My improvised weapon made contact, and the man cursed, momentarily retreating. But it wasn't enough. One of the men struck Alex hard, sending him reeling backward. He stumbled, catching himself just in time, and looked at me with an urgency I hadn't seen before. "Lena, run. Now." But my feet felt glued to the ground. Leaving him wasn't an option. Not after everything we had been through. I couldn't let him face this alone, no matter how much I wanted to escape the chaos that had become my life. With a burst of resolve, I grabbed the closest object, a rusted metal pipe, and charged back into the fight. Together, we managed to push the attackers back long enough for us to slip out a side door, our breaths ragged as we sprinted into the night. We ran through the winding streets, the cold night air biting at my skin as we put as much distance as we could between ourselves and the warehouse. Alex held my hand tightly, guiding me through back alleys and narrow paths until we finally found a small, dimly lit diner. We slipped inside, grateful for the warmth and the temporary sense of safety. Once we were seated in a corner booth, Alex took my hands in his gaze filled with regret and a hint of fear. "Lena, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice rough. "I never wanted you to get hurt." I searched his face, my heart torn between love and fury. "Then why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep so much from me?" He sighed, his grip on my hands tightening. "Because I didn't want to lose you. Every time I looked at you, I saw a life I thought I could have, a life free from all this darkness. I tried to keep you out of it, but I've failed. And now it's too late." I wanted to tell him it wasn't too late, that we could find a way to escape together, to leave all of this behind. But deep down, I knew the truth. Alex's world wasn't something you could just walk away from. There would always be people hunting him, debts that needed to be paid. "We need to get out of here," he said suddenly, his voice low. "There's somewhere we can go, a safe house. It'll buy us some time to figure out what to do next." A few hours later, we arrived at a small, secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the quiet was almost eerie. It felt as though the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this lonely refuge. Inside, the cabin was simple, a worn-out couch, a small kitchen, and a single bed. Alex locked the door behind us, securing every window, every possible entry point. When he was finally satisfied, he turned to me, the weight of his decisions etched deeply into his face. I took a shaky breath. Alex, are we really safe here? He nodded slowly.
For now.
This place was set up years ago by a contact of mine, a place to lay low if things ever went south. I never thought I'd actually have to use it, especially not with you. I sat down on the couch, exhaustion crashing over me. Alex, I don't know if I can keep doing this, if I can keep running. He sat down beside me, his hand gently brushing a strand of hair from my face. I know, and I don't want this for you, but I also can't imagine a life without you in it. If you want to walk away, Lena, I'll understand. I'll help you disappear, whatever it takes to keep you safe. I looked into his eyes, feeling the weight of his words. He was giving me an out, a chance to escape this nightmare. But even as my heart screamed for me to take it, to run and never look back, I couldn't bring myself to leave him. I can't, I whispered. I can't leave you, Alex. No matter how much I want to escape this, I love you, and I won't let you face this alone. He pulled me close, his arms wrapping around me as if he were afraid I'd disappear. In that moment, all the lies, the half-truths, the pain, none of it mattered. All that mattered was that we were here, together, fighting for whatever future we had left. The next morning, as the first light filtered through the trees outside, I woke to find Alex sitting by the window, his gaze distant. He looked as though he hadn't slept, his face etched with worry. "What's wrong?" I asked, moving to sit beside him. He turned to me, a haunted look in his eyes. "Lena, there's something I haven't told you. Something that makes everything even more complicated." My heart sank, bracing myself for yet another revelation. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his voice barely a whisper. "Isabel, she's not just part of my past. She's my wife." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I felt the ground shift beneath me as I tried to process what he had just said. "Your wife," I echoed, my voice hollow. He nodded, his face filled with guilt. It was a marriage of convenience. We were both in the same world, both entangled in debts and obligations. We thought if we combined our resources, we could find a way out. But it never worked. Instead, it trapped us both, and I found myself seeking an escape with you. I pulled away from him, my heart breaking. "So, what was I, Alex? Just another escape?" "No," he said urgently, his hands reaching out to me. "You were everything I'd ever wanted. Everything I thought I could never have. I know how terrible it sounds, but I fell in love with you, Lena. I tried to end things with Isabel, but leaving her completely would have been dangerous for both of us." I shook my head, unable to look at him. "So you lied to me from the start." "Please, Lena, try to understand," he pleaded, his voice filled with desperation. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but if you can find it in your heart to give me a second chance, I swear, I'll make this right." I stood up, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to run, to leave him and the mess he had created. But another part, the part that still loved him despite everything, held me back. "Alex, I need time," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to figure out if I can keep doing this, if I can keep being with someone who keeps breaking my heart." He nodded, his expression filled with sorrow. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, no matter how long it takes." As I walked away, the full weight of our situation settled over me. Alex, a man I loved but barely understood, was a person of contradictions. And now, standing at the edge of everything we'd built, I was left with a choice: to dive deeper into the chaos or to let go, once and for all.